David is not king yet. Okay. Saul is king, but David has already been anointed. So we know that this created animosity, envy, and jealousness between Saul and David because, of course, Saul is threatened, right? It's his kingship. He's the king. But we know that what God ordains, no one can
strip away.
Absolutely. So there's war going on, right? Saul is chasing after David, trying to kill him, and that's all happening. So what's happening here is David is pretty much goes, and I love this because David goes to God for everything, right? David always goes to God. And so the Philistines are going into Keilah and they're taking their food, right? So they're taking their food. So David's like, God, okay, do you want me to go and help them, right? Do you want me to go and protect them and go to battle, go to war, fight those Philistines off? And so like that, they have food to be able to survive. And he asked twice because the men are kind of like, not sure, right? They're in fear because they're living in fear because they're running from Saul. They're still running away from him because they don't want to be killed because they know that Saul's trying to kill David. So God's like, yes, go into Keilah, and again, same thing that God is doing to David here is like he did with Elijah because God has been leading him, go do this, go do that. And he's just doing God's work. Right. And so same thing here. That's exactly what David is doing. So David goes, him and his 600 men, they kill all the Philistines. Everything's good. But then Saul, right? Verse 7, Saul learns that David is at Keilah. So he learns. So of course, Saul mobilized his entire army and starts marching to Keilah to besiege David and his men. So of course, David learns of Saul's plan and he goes to the Lord and asks, Lord, right? I love this because he asks, is Saul planning to come and destroy Keilah? Because I'm here. Okay. He asked that question and he said, will the leaders of Keilah betray me to him? And will Saul actually come as I have heard? Please tell me. And the Lord said, he will come. And so David asked again, will the leaders of Keilah betray me and my men to Saul? And the Lord replied, yes, they will betray you. I love this because God didn't say, oh no, son, I got you. I'm going to protect you. He didn't verbalize that. David asked a question and God said, yes, this is going to happen. Yes, they're going to come after you. When you think about Psalm 23 and you said, he sets a table in the presence of my enemies. This is it right here. I'm setting you a table. Your enemies are going to come after you. I'm not changing. And you talked about this in our last episode. I'm not changing
your
circumstance, but I'm going to change your
outlook and how you view your circumstance.
Yeah. Right. So we see here that I just really wanted to point that out, but it goes into the key verses that we're going to focus on today. And it's 13 through 17. So after this, he learns that he is going to come after him. And what does David do? You want to read that for me? Verse 13 through 17.
Verse 13, then David and his men, about 600, arose and departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could go. When it was told Saul that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the pursuit. David stayed in the wilderness, in the strongholds, and remained in the hill country, in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God did not deliver him into his hand. Verse 15, now David became aware that Saul had come out to seek his life while David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh. And Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David to Horesh and encouraged him in God. Thus he said to him, do not be afraid, because the hand of Saul, my father, will not find you, and you will be king over Israel, and I will be the next to you. And Saul, my father, knows that also.
Yes. Man, I love this when you think about Psalm 61. So David could have stayed. He could have stayed behind with his 600 men to face Saul, but he didn't. What did he do? He roamed the countryside. It says on verse 13, right?
Countryside, yep.
Yes. So he didn't go to Keilah. Verse 14, David now stayed, this is the NLT version, in the strongholds of the wilderness and in the hill country of Zeph. Saul hunted him day after day, but God didn't let Saul find him. So David went to the Judean mountains, and that is where Zeph is, right? So he didn't stay there to fight that battle because he knew it wasn't his battle to fight. He knew that it wasn't something that he needed to face in that moment, right? David went to the strongholds of the wilderness, the strongholds. And where is that? That is higher power. Right. That is where his hiding place is, his refuge is, his safety is. He knew where to go, right? It says that David stayed in the strongholds of the wilderness and in the hill country of Zeph. Saul hunted him day after day, but God didn't let Saul find him. And I go back to Psalm 61 where it says, lead me to the towering rock of safety, for you are my safe refuge, a fortress where my enemies cannot find me. Because God didn't stop Saul from chasing David, but he did protect him. And that is a strong word, that God is our protector. He is our defender. He is our refuge. He is our safety. You know, and one more thing that I want to really point out about David, because we know that David was the only man in the Bible that God called a man after his own heart. So we know that David became a man after God's own heart in that shepherd field. Okay. But he became king in the wilderness. He became king in the wilderness because the wilderness prepared him to be king, to be the leader, to rule, and to do and execute God's plan in his life. So when you think about that, right? When you think about what I just said is adversity, opposition, our struggles, our challenges, well, guess what? They lead us and help us become who God needs us to be so that we can execute his plan, so we can continue to build his spiritual kingdom. That's so right. When you're in the wilderness, when you're in the strongholds of the wilderness, because you're not just in any wilderness, you're in the strongholds of the wilderness, right? In the wilderness, that means you have that towering rock of safety with you, even though it may not feel like it, right? He's preparing you. He's building you up.